Welcome to episode 2 of Ed Talk. In this episode, we'll go over the Set 5 Emerald Steel matchups. So the purpose of this guide is to go over the matchups, and it's also for people that are new as well as seasoned players of Green Steel to try to evaluate, the card choices and play patterns of the deck. I won't go over any of the mulligans as Zan already did a video on that, and if you haven't watched it yet, I would highly recommend it. The order in which the matchups I present will be the ones I think are going to be the most popular going forward. And if I learn anything new or if there's any kind of evolutions in the meta, I will also evaluate and add to this guide. So for the deck list that we'll be starting off with, we'll use Zan's winning list from DLC Las Vegas. His differences are 2 Hidden Cove versus 4 Anna in our build. And he has 2 Muses and we have 4 Tinkerbells in our build. So fundamentally, the deck still plays very similarly, but the Hidden Cove helps a lot in the kind of brawl matchups, and Muses also helps in the aggro matchups. So what is the goal of Emerald Steel, right? If you're a new player, it's like kind of, daunting to try to learn a new deck. So I'll try to explain it as simple as possible. So the deck consists of draw cards, destroy cards, and kind of discard cards, right? So the draw cards are, Diablo, Prince John, Beast. Discard cards are like the Ursula, Deceiver, Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, Anna. And the destroy cards are like the Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of the Raging Fire. We don't talk about Bruno and Tinkerbell. I added another category of like anti-destroy cards like Hidden Cove and Pete. The Hidden Cove is mostly to kind of protect your Diablo and Beast from, Brawl and Medusa respectively. And Pete also stops like grab your sword and be prepared if played on the right turn. So I think another kind of play pattern that newer players do is to kind of just randomly play Sudden Chill. And I think one of the, separators of like a good Green Steel player and like a novice is like the ability to kind of use all your discard in one turn to try to get the rest of your opponent's hand, because usually the last card in their hand is the most important one, and getting that one is very crucial for achieving victory. So I guess other general heuristics, like in the first few turns, the best thing you can be doing is like shifting Diablo and like Let the Storm Rage On to kind of kill the opponent's like cards before they get to do anything. Turn 2, if you're running Hidden Cove, it's also very strong to kind of protect your Diablo, because it's one of those ways to kind of block Brawl and like other steal spells like Let the Storm Rage On, and like some people are playing like Fire the Cannons or Baboom, and the Hidden Cove will protect the Diablo from that. Other like good turn 2 turns, you can do Ursula 2 to kind of take a song away from your opponent. So some decks are, song heavy, and you'll basically always get a card off of them. So that's another good choice. Morph is also very strong on turn 2. If, you're against Ruby decks, you can play Beast, and it's actually very hard for them to remove from turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. And Shift Tinkerbell is also very strong against like the aggressive strategies, as just shifting Tinkerbell on turn 4, you can usually shut down like entire boards with that. So on turn 3, like we said earlier, you can shift Beast, or you play Ursula 3 to kind of sing those kill spells that we talked about earlier, Let the Storm Rage On, or Strength of the Raging Fire. And you can also if you're able to deploy like a turn 4 Prince John, using Sudden Chill to make your opponent discard 2 cards and you draw 2 cards is probably one of the strongest plays in the deck. So turn 4, you can shift Tinkerbell also, like we discussed earlier, to shut down aggro strategies. You can also play Muses to sing your Ursula or your Prince John that you played on turn 3, and then sing something to stop the aggro decks from just like questing away. And like we said earlier, Prince John combined with the Ursula 3, you're able to discard 2 cards from them and draw 2 cards. One of the best plays in the deck. So I would say the most popular deck you'll run into is probably Ruby Sapphire. If I had to estimate, it's probably 20 to 25% of the metagame at the moment. And how I want to kind of frame these matchup guides are, how does this deck win and how does their deck win, right? So how does like Emerald Steel beat Ruby Sapphire generally? So generally how they win is, you try to stick all your draw cards, like, your Diablo, your Beast, your Prince John, and, you discard your opponent down to 0. And how does Ruby Sapphire win then? So Ruby Sapphire's goal is to destroy all those cards like we said before, like Beast, Diablo, Prince John, and try to insulate yourself against the discard by playing Hiram specifically. So another key to this matchup, if you play Hidden Cove, is that, Hidden Cove protects your Diablo from Brawl early game, and it will probably take at least until turn 6, where, the Ruby Sapphire player destroys the Hidden Cove with like a Maui, and then does like a turn 6 Brawl or Medusa. So I think early on, a lot of the Ruby Sapphire players were kind of just dumping their hands way too quickly with like Fishbone and going to 0 cards. And I think this is probably not the right way to play this matchup, because now you're kind of just like playing off the top, and like most of the cards off the top of your deck are actually not very strong. Because if you think about it, like a lot of the popular versions of Ruby Sapphire, they're running, 3 or 4 copies of Big Sisu and 3 or 4 copies of Be Prepared, or some are even running like only 2 copies. So between basically, 6 to 8 copies of those cards, and like if you're not able to draw them at the right time, then you'll just lose the game, right? So I think a better way to kind of approach it is try to draw as many cards with Hiram as possible, and just discard all the cards that are kind of useless, and just like ink up slowly until you can hit a certain threshold that you can, ink twice and then play Be Prepared or Big Sisu. So the key cards in each of the matchups. So for Emerald Steel, right? Like you definitely want to be able to stick a Diablo, Prince John, or Beast and try to get value from those cards, right? Like try to draw as many cards as possible, and those cards will in turn turn into like the discard cards and the destroy spells. So the destroy spells are actually a little bit less powerful in this matchup, because most of the cards are kind of big bodies, right? So the main way you kind of win is just to like discard your opponent's hand and make it so they don't get to play the big removal cards like Be Prepared and Big Sisu. So for Ruby Sapphire side, what are they trying to do? So they're trying to play, Popsicle, Hiram, in order to insulate themselves against all the discard cards. And even though, Tipo also kind of in a way, you lose 2 cards, right? You lose your Tipo and the extra ink. The ability to do like a turn 3 Hiram is very powerful. So I would say that, turn 2 Tipo is definitely one of the best cards on turn 2. One Jump Ahead, I think, is also very powerful, specifically on the play. I think on the draw, it's a little sketchy because, if your opponent plays Diablo and, they see that you have a 1 jump, they'll, Ursula to take away your 1 jump before you get to use it. So I think if you're on the draw with Ruby Sapphire, you definitely mull away your 1 Jump Ahead and try to go for that, Pop, Tipo, Hiram game plan. But, if you're on the play, definitely just play the 1 jump and, don't let them take it with the Ursula. The other choice for ramping that some players play and some players don't. I know Moyen is a very big fan of How Far I'll Go. And I think in this matchup, that card is actually very powerful because I guess they don't always like take it. Because like, let's say you have 1 jump and How Far I'll Go, you might be able to kind of insulate yourself against Ursula 2 by having both copies in your hand, and they can only take 1, right? But How Far I'll Go is very powerful just because, you're able to kind of keep that card in your hand while gaining ink. So I think that has a lot of value in this matchup. So if, we're talking about like how the matchups work out, How Far I'll Go will definitely make your chances of winning higher. And the other cards to look out for are like, Brawl in order to kill Diablo, and the Human Sisu Ice Block combo. I think that combo is very potent, right? Like I think one of the nut hands that you can have as Ruby Sapphire is, turn 1 Popsicle, turn 2 some kind of ramp, Tipo or 1 jump, And then turn 3, you have 4 ink, right? You can do ice block, on the Diablo, and then hit, the Diablo with the human Sisu. And then after you deal with the Sisu, you can play Hiram, like without having your opponent draw cards. And then after, you get to your 7 to 8 ink, be prepared, and Big Sisu usually, locks up the game by, killing everything, right? And usually your top decks are way better as the Ruby Sapphire player. So that's usually how the matchup goes. Basically, number 1 for Ruby Sapphire is to, kill the Diablo and Beast, and then develop Hiram after that, and develop your, Be Prepared and Big Sisu cards. So I think the next most important matchup that you have to learn is probably the mirror. And unfortunately, the mirror is very luck dependent, and it basically goes back to like, who gets to stick as many copies of, Diablo and Beast. And if you're able to deal with your opponents and, they can't deal with yours, you'll basically win the game. So what are like the key cards that, helps you beat the mirror? I think Hidden Cove is very strong, because if you think about it, like Emerald Steel actually doesn't have that many easy ways to deal with Hidden Cove, unless you also have a Hidden Cove, right? So Hidden Cove is very powerful. It basically blocks like the Let the Storm Rage on your Diablo, and you'll guarantee to draw like at least 1 or 2 cards off of that. And usually drawing those extra cards lets you snowball into like more destroy, more draw, and more discard. So Hidden Cove, very powerful. And in the same kind of vein, Muses is also very powerful to be able to kind of bounce your opponent's Diablos and basically never let them quest with it and draw cards off of it. So I'm sure you guys seen like the finals with, Chris and Zan, and in that first game, like that Muses was doing a lot of work just being able to keep Chris off the board. And it's also very, it's very hard to come back if you're able to stick Muses, because there's basically no outs, I would say, in like the standard version of this deck to deal with Muses. So Amber Steel, I would say, probably dropped to like 3rd after, Emerald Steel kind of took its spot. And I would say like the key for Emerald Steel to win is to be able to play, Ursula 2 to take the songs, and Pete to prevent them from playing any actions, and like the Muses to kind of bounce all the small cards back to their hand. And for Amber Steel, you're definitely like the aggro in this matchup. And I would say it's very important to kind of play to the board like as many cards as possible, and just try to overwhelm, the Emerald Steel player before they get to destroy all your cards. So from the Emerald Steel side, I would say you shouldn't play like anything with like small health, or like, 2 health if possible, like Diablo, or like 1 health like Morph. Because like Amber Steel is basically, all their songs are the songs that you have, right? They have Let the Storm Rage on, they have Strength, and they can pick off your cards very easily. And that's why I kind of suggest to play, Ursula 2, 3 health, Pete, 3 health, and Muses, right, 4 health with Ward. So those cards are very hard to deal with, and like you'll have a much better time if you're able to stick, cards to the board and have your opponent kind of be on the back foot. So what are like the key cards, right, in this matchup? So like I said earlier, you want to be able to disrupt your opponent by playing like Ursula 2, Pete, Muses. And for Amber Steel, basically you just want to have your destroy cards, right, when they don't have the disruptor cards. So for example, like, obviously Emerald Steel will not always open like Ursula, Pete, Muses. Sometimes you have like, your Diablo and Morph game plan. And if that ends up being like your hand, if the Amber Steel is able to like, let the Storm Rage on your Diablo or Morph, usually that's how you lose those games. So after that, I would say it's, Ruby Amethyst is probably in 4th. And I would say the game plan is fairly similar to Ruby Sapphire. Like, they have the big, Be Prepared and Big Sisu as the ways to kind of deal with Emerald Steel. Not all copies, or not all like Ruby Amethyst decks play the Big Sisu, but I would say it's probably the correct thing to do because of the popularity of Emerald Steel. And yeah, so for Emerald Steel, like, you want to also same thing as Ruby Sapphire. Play as many of the draw cards as possible and try to like discard your opponent's hand down to 0. And I would say like from Ruby Amethyst side is also try to keep like, you know, your opponent off Diablo and Beast early, and, you know, try to play your rabbits and bounce your rabbits as much as possible until you can get to that Be Prepared or that big Sisu. And, you know, in this matchup is very similar where Hidden Cove is very hard to, well, it's not as hard to deal with as Ruby Sapphire, because I think a lot of the newer versions of Ruby Amethyst have like Crab, and they play Fox, and they play Maui's. So I think Hidden Cove is still very good because, you know, they can't play those cards until later. So you're going to get some guaranteed draw from your Diablos. So what are the key cards in this matchup, right? So Emerald Steel, you really want to stick your Diablo, Prince John, and Beast. And you want to try to discard as aggressively as possible with like your Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, Anna. And from the Ruby Amethyst side, I think rabbits are very important. I think you need to probably play at least, you know, 2 or 3 copies of rabbit in order to kind of outrace the discard, right? So, you know, play rabbit, bounce it, play it again. And usually, you know, if you're able to do that and kind of outpace the discard, that's one of the ways to kind of beat it. I think another kind of underlooked way to beat Emerald Steel are locations. Especially if they don't have Hidden Cove. Actually, a lot of the characters don't have that much attack. So getting through locations is actually pretty tough. And if you're able to stick like a library and put, you know, any character in it and, you know, get it destroyed, and you're able to like kind of recover the card, that's actually very powerful. And I would say it could catch some Emerald Steel players off guard, because I think library is not that popular. But, you know, Queen's Castle is also very good. If you're ever able to play a Queen's Castle and put a couple characters in there, that'll also usually get you to the finish line. The other very important cards I would say are, you know, Brawl, Elsa Fifth Spirit to tap down Diablo or Beast to kind of turn them off. Medusa to also turn, you know, Diablo and Beast off. And, you know, Be Prepared a big Sisu to try to close the game. So, I mean, in this matchup, it basically comes down to, you know, can the Emerald Steel player stick, you know, Diablo, Beast? And if not, then, you know, the Ruby Amethyst will take it. So I grouped all these decks together, these like aggro decks like Emerald Amethyst, Amber Amethyst, and like I think there has been some, you know, Amber Emerald played as an aggressive strategy. And I think for, you know, Emeralds from the Emerald Steel side, I would say, you know, being able to play like an early shifted Diablo is very strong, because actually a lot of aggro decks don't have that much interaction. So you can just kind of play anything and, you know, they don't really have any ways to deal with it. The only exception are like in Amethyst, there's like early befuddles for like Morph. And in Emerald decks, there's like a turn 3 Kit Cloud Kicker that they can kick like your Morph back to your hand. So, but besides that, there's actually not a lot of ways to kind of interact with your board. And I would say the most important thing you can do in this matchup is to be able to shift a Tinkerbell or play like a Muses to try to, you know, bounce your opponent's like cards back before they can quest with it. And from the aggro side, it's basically, can you keep them off Tinkerbell and Muses? Because otherwise, like, you're going to be able to outrace Emerald Steel if you're able to do that. But if not, then you'll probably lose, right? So yeah, key cards. Obviously, the Destroy package, right? Morph, and also Ursula 3 is very potent in this matchup because it's able to sing like the double kill spells, right? Like double Let the Storm Rage On, double Strength of the Raging Fire. Able to deal with 2 cards, very powerful. And then if you're able to do, you know, Shift Tink on turn 4, the game's over. And then Muses is also very similar, because if you're able to do like Ursula 3 and then Muses and then double sing, you're actually able to deal with 4 cards, right? Because, you know, Muses will trigger twice and then, you know, Ursula will double sing and kill 2 things. And from the aggro side, like there's actually not much except for like kind of, you know, the Morph disruptors, like Befuddle on Morph or like Kit Cloud Kicker on Morph. I think there is some debate, like if you do have Kit Cloud Kicker, would you Kit Cloud Kick like the Morph or the Ursula 3? Personally, I think it's probably correct to hit the morph because it's so devastating if they're able to shift like Tinkerbell. So personally, I would hit morph, and if they hit you with Ursula 3, they hit you with Ursula 3. But I think the Tinkerbell is way more devastating. So after that, I think Sapphire Steel will also kind of make a resurgence. I think it was a little underplayed before Vegas, and even after Vegas, I think maybe it's still a little underplayed, but there's definitely some, Sapphire Steel kind of believers playing the deck. And I would say it's very similar to Ruby Sapphire in that the game plan is to try to not dump your hand as aggressively as possible, but instead try to like ramp up and draw cards from Hiram, and then make sure you destroy like the Diablo and Beast and don't let them run away with the game. So I think to win with Emerald Steel, I think it's actually very important to try to discard your opponent's cards, because there's so many kind of catch-up songs that Sapphire Steel has, right? For example, they have, Whole New World. Like, they could just negate your entire game plan of, discarding your card, and, Grab Your Sword kills, Diablo, it kills your Prince John, and as the Emerald Steel player, you have to, prevent them from, playing those cards, or else you'll basically lose the game. And then from the Sapphire Steel side, like, Cogsworth is very annoying. Like, if you ever get to deploy Cogsworth, it's basically unkillable, and it makes a lot of your other characters also very hard to deal with. If you're ever able to play like Cogsworth into Tinkerbell, and then you sing Whole New World or Grab Your Swords, like, I think the game is basically over. Emerald Steel does not have a very easy time like playing catch up, right? Like, the way that Emerald Steel usually wins is you get ahead on board, and then you discard your opponent's hand, and they just can't catch up, and eventually your Diablo and Beast will go kind of unanswered, and that's how you would usually win the game. So from Emerald Steel side, key cards, definitely like the discard. Ursula 2 puts in a ton of work, because there's, the Whole New World and Grab Your Sword are the most potent cards in Sapphire Steel, and being able to discard those cards is very important. And obviously, the other one, Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, Anna, very important to discard your opponent's hand and not let them play those power cards. So from Sapphire Steel, like, drawing is very important. Like, being able to insulate with Hiram, Whole New World, basically you'll win the game if you ever get to kind of outpace the discard. And a lot of the, Sapphire Steel decks are, playing Fire the Cannons and Baboom for the like early Diablo, and, Grab Your Swords, Tinkerbell to be able to, destroy the later down the road. And I think one other kind of underestimated thing is the big characters in Sapphire Steel, like Chenpo, and I guess, Cogsworth. Some people are playing like the Simba. I think those cards are also very annoying. If you're ever able to deploy those, it's actually very annoying for Emerald Steel. And like, there's not many catch-up mechanics, right? Like, the best case scenario probably is, Bruno on Chenpo or Bruno on Simba. But even then, like, they could just replay it, and like, it's very hard to come back. So I would say in this matchup, yeah, Sapphire Steel, I would say, probably has a little easier time, just because, there's so many destroy cards that can keep you off Diablo or Beast. But, if Emerald Steel is able to kind of race your discard, then Emerald Steel will win. So the other variation of this card, Amber Emerald, I think probably goes down in popularity a little bit because of Emerald Steel. And fundamentally, if you think about it, they're kind of similar, right? They're, their main game plan is also to kind of discard. But, what are the fundamental differences, right? Like, Steel, you get to play like Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of the Raging Fire, Pete, Beast, Tinkerbell. And then in Amber, you get to play, Bare Necessities, You Have Forgotten Me, Ariel to kind of get, Bare Necessities or Sudden Chill, and then Kita with like Under the Sea, right? So if you kind of like look at the differences, Steel, you basically get like more destroy, and Amber, you get more accelerated discard. So if you think about it like that, you want to be able to kind of be able to play to the board more easily as like the Emerald Steel and keep your Emerald opponent off the board. Whereas, Amber Emerald will discard you way more rapidly. So I think in order to win as the Emerald Steel player, you need to be able to stick the drawing cards, right? Like Diablo, and you have Beast, right, over Amber. And Amber, like, basically you also want to stick Diablo because, you know, it's very important for you to be able to kind of keep up with the advantage. And if Amber Emerald ever gets to play Under the Sea, you'll basically lose the game. So I guess it's like, how do you keep your opponent off Under the Sea is the important kind of skill to have as the Emerald Steel player. So like we said earlier, like key cards, you want to be able to draw as much as possible. Diablo, Prince John, Beast, and like having Storm and Strength are very important to be able to kill the opposing Diablos. And also Pete is very important in that, you know, you can basically brick your opponent for a turn and let you kind of set up your plays. So I think from Amber Emerald, it all comes down to like if you're able to play Under the Sea. I don't think you even necessarily need Kita, because I think basically everything is like 2, except Beast and Tinkerbell. But, you know, if you're playing like Painting the Roses Red, for example, you can get Beast under that threshold and also Sing Under the Sea from that. So yeah, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more content. Bye bye.